And I remember Dwayne Litvin once saying, you can have the best polity and the wrong people and have a disaster.
Yikes.
You can have the worst polity and good people and have a good church.
The day's question comes from Jordan, and he and I emailed back and forth a little bit, so I'm just going to kind of paraphrase some of his questions. But he's kind of concerned about the lack of oversight for non-denominational churches. It sounds like that's where he attends right now, and he says that they are teaching the Bible, but it concerns him compared to a PCA church or an Anglican church, which of course have all of this structure and oversight for these churches. And he, understands that having elders is part of that non-denom, usually the, accountability and authority. But, and then he also had this follow-up that I know where we want to really land. He's thinking that attending like a PCA church or an Anglican church gives you some sort of institutional unity. And isn't there something important to attending and being a member of a church body that's truly unified?
Right. It's actually a thoughtful question, and I would say in 40-plus years, this is not new. Even in seminary, we talked a lot about the benefits of oversight beyond a local body. Let's dive in.
Would you, time out really fast, you went to Dallas Theological Seminary. Was that mostly non-denominational folks? Because, like if you're Anglican, you're going to an Anglican seminary, right?
And you won't be able to be positioned in those churches if you don't
didn't
have
go to
the
their
right
seminary. Right.
I think when I went, there were under 20 denominational.
I was going to say, I guess a lot of Baptists are probably there too.
Baptist, Presbyterians, some of them. A lot of the Bible church movement was pretty big in those days. Some of the fundamentalists, IFCA, GERB, it depended that they were a little at risk doing that because they might not to mainstream in their own churches. Now, of course, it's
so
40.
Tons of denominations.
And when I was at Moody, there were over 48 denominations of students at Moody. So anyway, I always like to go back to Acts chapter 2. Yeah. When Jesus Christ inaugurates the church, Pentecost, we have 13 dialects, Parthians, Scythians, Medes, they're all speaking their own language. And the birth of the church is authenticated by the gift of tongues, which there was dialectos, language.
Yep.
So you're speaking German, I'm Italian. I can hear Italian when you speak. When I speak, you hear German. So that was really the miracle. That church, in very short order, has trouble.
Sure.
By Acts chapter 6, there's infighting with the Hellenistic Jews, Greek-speaking Jews, and we might say the real Jews.
Right.
And the widows are being neglected, and there's, this, it's almost like who gets to sit where.
Right.
Human beings.
I know.
And so the apostles set up what we call deacons, which I don't think technically they were at that point, but they set up faithful men. Stephen is the one who leads the list to wait on tables and distribution. And this wasn't just, taking it from the kitchen to this is an organization of how food was distributed to thousands of people. So we think about a guy just carrying a plate of food.
Right.
No, this was organizing meal preparation, where the food's coming from, who gets how much, based on household. It was involved, but it's a fight. Acts 15, we've got a bigger fight. It's called the Jerusalem Council. And think about this. These are the apostles. And now Paul and Barnabas are out sharing Christ, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the most part of the earth.
Okay.
They're doing that outline of Acts. They're planting churches. People are coming to Christ. Cornelius in chapter 10 is a Gentile. The gospel is going beyond the Jew. Basically, the mother church says, come home. We hear you're letting Gentiles trust in Jesus, and they're not Jewish enough. So there's a big confab. And you can almost see Barnabas and Paul getting this letter going, really?
Yeah.
We got to come off the field to go home and answer for what we're doing.
And convince you that we're doing the Lord's work.
and at the end of the council, they come back with, what you're doing is okay, but tell those people to abstain from fornication and immorality and eating meat sacrificed to idols. What? Now, context is huge. We can't go down that rabbit hole. But what is interesting from a principle level, the church began with internal fighting and trouble.
So depressing.
Jerusalem, sinful people. And the Jerusalem Council, these are the apostles and first century disciples.
Yeah.
Paul, when he writes the pastorals, is correcting Corinth and Thessalonica, and the folks at Philippi get a pretty good, report card, if you will.
Philippians.
Ephesus, it is half good, half not so good. So within the first century, there's infighting. Now, let's make a huge jump forward, and let's go to the Great Schism in church history, where Western Christianity, as we would call it, and Eastern.
Yep.
Let's go on the Western top of the chart.
Yep.
Protestantism is all the Catholic Church, and now it's going to have this great schism. And then we can think about guys like Ambrose and Erasmus and, of course, Augustine, and these aren't necessarily in chronological order, but these church fathers become these huge voices. They're all factions.
Right.
Even during what people love to talk about, the Reformation and the Reformed years, Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, Melanchthon all had very different views on things.
All disagreed on stuff. Yeah.
Big time.
Yeah.
And so there's not this unified church that everybody got along in the Reformation, and they were trying to reform the Catholic Church. That was in principle what was going on. Indulgences, whether the Lord's Supper was the Eucharist, transubstantiation, some of these subset issues. But my point is, not to sound defeatist, there's nothing new.
Yeah.
So we're sinful people. We're fallen people in a fallen context trying to worship God.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah.
I look at today and the number of what we would call evangelical, fundamental, Bible-believing churches that don't disagree on all kinds of things.
Right.
So it's really hard to say, would a governing authority besides local elders make it better?
Right. Or create any kind of unity.
Yeah. So it was over 40 years ago in seminary, this question came up because Dallas Seminary avoided any ecclesiology, meaning they didn't say this was how you should run a church.
Interesting.
Professors had their leanings.
Their own opinions.
When I attended Trinity Fellowship, when your mom and I were there, it was a elder rule church. There were 7 men. This is the way it's going to be.
Yeah.
No vote, no congregational opinion, no input. Now, they listened, but they made decisions. Yeah. Every church I've been involved with had some, elders, congregational vote, plus elders, majority, unanimity.
Right.
They're all flawed.
Right.
And I remember Dwayne Litvin once saying, you can have the best polity and the wrong people and have a disaster.
Yikes.
You can have the worst polity and good people and have a good church.
Yeah.
So I think it's a bit of an illusion, and grass is greener, that when we have a problem in any structure, if they had an organization above them, it'd be better. Case in point.
Maybe not.
A friend of mine is in a Presbyterian church. So there's the session, local body. Yep. There is the presbyter, which is over like a diocese, if you will, and then the General Assembly. He was, let's say, called on the carpet. The session did some things. They kicked it over to audit. They came in, said everything's fine. The session didn't like the audit. They kicked it up to the presbyter. The presbyter got involved and came in and said, he's on indefinite leave. That's been going on for probably a year. Wow. It could go to the General Assembly, but then you ask yourself, if you're the pastor who's the target of all this, there's no win.
Right.
Everybody's losing.
Right.
Do you leave? Do you fight? I don't know how to answer that question for anyone else. The idea that a board above a board of a board is going to be better on paper, maybe, but there's still personalities. There's still strong opinions.
Right.
There's still traditional memories.
Right.
I knew that church when.
Right.
You can't separate that.
Yeah.
There's no blind justice when it comes to church politics.
Right. Right.
So I go back to Litvin. Best polity, wrong people. The wrong polity, good people. Unfortunately, we're sinful people. I used to have a book on the denominations in America. And at one time there were over 700. I bet it's in the thousands now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this ain't going to be solved by a form of government.
Right.
Lastly, I want to take a little sidebar on the unity of the faith and the unified body he talks about. Ephesians 4:13 says, until we all attain the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, to a mature man, the measure of the stature which belongs to the fullness of Christ. That's connected back to chapter 4, verse 5, one Lord, one faith, one baptism. So the unity of faith isn't all these churches get along.
Right.
It's do we understand there's one Lord, one faith,
Yes.
and one baptism. And baptism isn't mode there, it's identification.
Right.
So that, I think, is what that passage is talking about. There'll never be a unified church body on the planet until Christ comes back and is over his church, literally. I mean, look at Revelation, the 7 churches.
Right.
They all
Right.
get a report card, if you will.
Yeah.
So none of them are unified.
Yeah.
So there's an illusion. Now, the practical part of this,
Yes.
what church do you go to?
Right. Yeah.
And how do you live?
And on some hope.
Well, yeah, but you have to understand, for Cindy and me, there are non-negotiables.
Sure.
I can't go to a church that holds this because I'm going to be unhappy. I don't want to go in there and fight. That's not my place to go change a church. But I have to be able to be engaging and worshiping part of it, give my money, support the leaders. Yeah. That's important.
Yeah.
I think Cindy and I will stand before God in the stewardship of our money and how we gave. That's hugely important to your mom and me. Are there tensions? Always.
Yeah.
Now, I have acquaintances that they're doing everything right and their church is on the up and up. Bless God.
Yeah.
Bless God.
Yeah.
I've never been at that church. Sinful people are in leadership, sinful pastors open their mouths for a living. So you have to decide what are the non-negotiables and then pray. Now, here's the real problem. We don't live necessarily near good churches.
Yeah.
There may not be a healthy church. Streaming is good and bad. Online church
I think
is
it's mostly bad.
Good and bad and travesty.
Unless you're like
now, if you're an invalid.
Right. If you can't get to physically get to church, I think streaming's amazing.
Pandemic helped a lot of people
But
that were sick. Unfortunately, all this technology has created some ethical problems for us. At the end of the day, you and I would hope your spouse are prayerful, are intelligent, read the statement of faith, ask some hard questions.
Yeah.
I'm struck over the membership interviews I did. Very few people asked hard questions. And if they did, it was like, well, I was baptized as an infant and y'all don't accept that. You know, that was the kind of stuff we got into. Or
Where
I
did
speak
you do
in
membership
tongues.
interviews? Grand Prairie?
Emmanuel and Grand Prairie.
Emmanuel, really? Wow.
Emmanuel had a robust membership process.
Wow.
I loved it.
Even as it was like 7,000
Huge.
people.
Well,
Wow.
that's why we only had like 800 members.
Oh, but you got to vote as a member.
Yep.
And so, okay.
And then you had to have a, you know, and also we pulled from membership for teachers. I need to know what they believe.
Yeah. For Sunday school teachers.
You got to
and that
read
sort of
the
thing.
Constitution. You got to sign off on it.
Yeah,
You
that
have
makes sense.
you know, people that come in and want to change things.
Yeah.
And then why you let that Sunday school teacher talk about the church doesn't hold that view.
Yeah.
So it's a dance, and we had a pretty good way. It was complicated, but to say, look, for example, maybe you hold to a prayer language, and you've been doing that all your life.
Yeah.
I'm not going to, you know, beat you with a hammer.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you,
Yeah.
can you, when someone says, I believe in tongues, or I believe in a prayer language, microphone, what are you going to say to that person? I do too? Or as a leader, are you going to say, you know,
our church doctrine,
Emmanuel Bible Church holds this position?
Yeah.
So the question is, can you live under that and be supportive of that? Or are you going to come in and that's going to be a problem for you?
Right.
Now, if you can do that with integrity, which I think people can, great.
Yeah.
And we had very few problems. But it took that careful
that makes
teaching
sense. That's
and
interesting.
going through it, saying, I need you to sign here that I will support the doctrine of the church and defend the faith.
Yeah.
I don't have to be angry about it.
Right.
I don't have to get up in your grill.
And if I don't want to, I don't have to attend here. Or I don't have to be a member, but I can
100%.
be a faithful attender.
And we had a lot of those
that
would go through the process and say, well, I hold to this. I hold to that. Great. We
love
you.
We want you here.
And you know what? The rest of the church provides a ministry to missions, to students, to homeless. There's a lot of good going on in that church.
Yeah.
So it's a dance. I hate to use that word, but it is. And, you know, we're all going to stand before God, what we did with our stewardship of time, talent, ministry, and abilities. And I want to be aligned with a church that is, you know, got these certain non-negotiables.
Sure.
So
All right. Well, we went way over time.
Did we? I'm sorry.
It's all right.
Not sorry.
Yeah, exactly. If you've got a question for Dr. E, call us, text us, email us. The info is in your show notes. Ask Dr. E is produced by me, Hannah Seymour, mixed and mastered by Sonomorphic, and music composed by Jason Germain.